Jimmy was driving in the Nevada desert. It was very quiet during the day. There was only you, your backpack, and your old car. Because you were bored. You finally whistled. Jimmy didn't know that there was a strict rule that you were not allowed to whistle in the middle of the barren Nevada desert because there was a cold and cruel figure waiting for the sound of someone's whistle to be hunted. While on his afternoon drive, Jimmy saw a deer running towards his car. The deer looked abnormal, its legs were partially elongated, and its eyes were black. Because he wasn't paying attention, you hit the deer and you think your day is ruined. But he decided to stop and check on the deer. But all Jimmy saw was a black liquid that smelled like sulfur heading towards the middle of the barren desert. Jimmy turned to his car again, trying to start it, but the engine was dead. Jimmy's engine was damaged in the crash. Jimmy tried various ways to start it, but failed. Finally, he decided to grab his backpack and walk down the desert road, hoping a passing car would come and help him. But what Jimmy didn't know was that a creature was watching him. It had been targeting him for a long time. Jimmy continued walking along the highway. Nothing in sight, not even a car. Suddenly, he heard a scream in the desert. At that moment, Jimmy felt scared and shocked. He thought it was a robber hiding behind a fence, but the scream seemed real, and Jimmy decided to follow the scream into the desert, leading to the center of the desert. When Jimmy thought he had reached the sound of the scream, he saw the same deer he had hit earlier, staring at him with its bloodshot eyes. Jimmy was shocked, sweating, and he didn't know what awaited him. Jimmy stood frozen, only 100 meters away from the deer. The air around him suddenly felt heavy and smelled of pungent sulfur, the same smell as the black liquid on the road. The Nevada sun was slowly setting, leaving a sharp orange streak of light on the horizon that now felt very foreign. Jimmy stood frozen in the sand, accompanied only by his unnaturally elongated shadow. The deer, which had previously stood upright on its two legs, had now vanished into the darkness of the undergrowth, but its presence felt even more real through the whistling wind that carried the putrid scent of sulfur. Jimmy's hand fumbled with the strap of his backpack on his shoulder, a gesture to ensure his only source of supplies was still there. His face was horrified, but he tried to remain calm. He was no longer searching for the road. His focus was now entirely on identifying patterns amidst the creeping darkness. Every step Jimmy took on the cracked ground emitted a whisper-like sound of sand scraping against the ground. In the distance, the whistling sound he'd made earlier returned, but this time the tone was distorted and shrill, shifting from one point to another at a speed impossible for a normal human. This was the stage where the sense of security had completely faded, replaced by a creeping paranoia. Jimmy stopped in his tracks when he noticed something odd on the sand surface before him. The thick, black liquid he'd seen on the road had now formed new, circular trails, as if something were dancing around him without ever revealing itself. The rising moonlight cast a dim reflection on the liquid, revealing a texture more akin to engine oil than the blood of a living creature. In the silence, the bushes to Jimmy's left trembled violently. Instead of running, Jimmy turned off his small flashlight, letting his eyes adjust to the utter darkness. He knew that in this survival protocol, light is often not a shield, but a beacon guiding predators to their targets. In the darkness, he began to see disproportionate silhouettes, shapes attempting to resemble humans with overly long limbs and joints bent the wrong way, moving slowly through the shadows of the rocks. Without uttering a word, Jimmy began to back away with the precision of a watcher calculating distance. Every sense now focused on detecting the slightest movement around him. The screams he had been following earlier came again, this time at a very low frequency, vibrating in his chest more than his ears could hear. He dug slowly into his backpack, searching for a tool that might give him an edge in this deadly simulation. Ahead of him, In the pitch blackness, 2 points of red light appeared, not the car headlights he had expected, but the reflection of the eyes of the creature that had been waiting for him since that first whistle was released into the silent desert air. The 2 red dots in the darkness didn't blink, but they moved slowly downward, as if their owner were walking on sand. Jimmy remained standing, his hands hidden in his jacket pockets clenched tightly, counting each beat of his own heart to keep his consciousness from descending into hysteria. The silence of the Nevada desert was now shattered by a sound that was utterly inhuman, the dry, harsh scraping of bones, like a tree branch being forcefully snapped. The creature began to emerge in the moonlight. It no longer resembled a deer, but a jumbled mass of flesh and fur, its long limbs moving asynchronously. The creature moved sideways, circling Jimmy in a 10-meter radius, creating a perfect circle in the sand. With a perfectly still movement, Jimmy reached into his backpack and pulled out a digital camera. He didn't activate the flash, but instead used the electronic viewfinder to view in night mode. Through the small screen, he saw a sharper reality. The creature had a multi-layered face that looked like an unfinished leather mask. Every time Jimmy aimed the camera lens at it, the creature would pause for a moment, as if disturbed by the camera's electronic sensors. Jimmy noted this anomaly as a weakness for the monster. Technology might be the only thing standing between him and this ancient predator's instincts. However, he also realized that his camera's battery wouldn't last until dawn. A sudden gust of desert wind blew, carrying with it the increasingly dense scent of sulfur. Without warning, the creature suddenly shot forward at a speed that obscured the naked eye. Jimmy didn't run straight ahead. He began exploiting every small gap behind him. He could hear the sound of violently sloshing sand and labored breathing, a sound that sounded exactly like Jimmy's own when exhausted. The hunt has reached its peak, and in the Nevada darkness, Jimmy is no longer a lost motorist, but the main subject in a survival simulation that has no stop button. The silver moonlight was now the only remaining source of illumination. Jimmy no longer ran haphazardly. He began leaping from one rock face to another with calculated precision. He knew that the desert sand acted like a sensitive membrane, transmitting the vibrations of his footsteps directly to the sensors of predators lurking in the darkness. Behind him, the sound of heavy, asynchronous breathing could still be heard, but the sound had slowed, indicating that the creature was disoriented, searching for Jimmy's sudden disappearance. As he continued moving, Jimmy took out his digital camera. Through this lens, Jimmy performed periodic thermal scans. Behind a large boulder, he saw something impossible, a humanoid silhouette, yet devoid of any signs of body heat. The figure was cold, its color on the camera screen the same dark as the surrounding rock. This was tactical confirmation for Jimmy that he was dealing with no ordinary biological creature, but an entity capable of manipulating its internal temperature to blend in with its surroundings. Jimmy quickly turned off the camera, relying on his memory to keep moving without making a sound. In the distance, a vertical structure emerged from behind the dunes, a weathered wooden ranch house. To a layman, it might have looked like a trap, but for Jimmy, it was his only chance to create a physical barrier between himself and his pursuers. He ran across the remains of a barbed wire fence and entered through the front door, which hung on a single hinge. The smell of sulfur in the air suddenly faded, replaced by the scent of old wood and thick dust. Jimmy didn't hide in a corner. He immediately climbed to the second floor, seeking a vantage point that gave him a 360-degree view through the cracks in the cracked wooden walls. The silence inside the house was soon shattered by a new psychological assault. from outside the walls, the sound of claws scraping against the wood could be heard, but at the same time, the sound of an old radio began to emanate from downstairs. It played a classic country song, its volume fluctuating, as if its signal were being interrupted. Jimmy remained silent, controlling his breathing to avoid being heard. He realized the creature was trying to recreate the house's past atmosphere to induce nostalgia or a false sense of security that would catch its victim off guard. To him, this was simply a collection of manipulated audio data. His metacognitive fortitude was the only thing preventing him from going downstairs and investigating the source of the sound. The hunt culminated when a shadow appeared in the second-story window, directly in front of Jimmy. Behind the cracked glass, the figure attempted to take on Jimmy's form. A round, white head, black, pinpoint eyes, and a rigid posture. However, the imitation failed miserably. They simply stared at each other in stunned silence. Jimmy showed no fear, knowing that emotions fueled the creature's process of perfecting its disguise. By refusing to react, Jimmy effectively thwarted the monster's ability to imitate him. The cold blue light on the eastern horizon slowly faded, replaced by a thin golden streak that cut through the darkness of the Nevada desert. On the second floor of the old house, Jimmy remained motionless, his black dot-like eyes fixed on the failed figure of himself behind the cracked window pane. As the sunlight intensified, the stability of the figure behind the window began to crumble. The previously solid mimicry began to loosen and sag like heated wax. The static and audio recordings that had filled the air gave way to a faint hiss, akin to the sound of water dripping on hot metal. Without a scream or struggle, the entity lost its ability to maintain its physical mass under the ultraviolet radiation of dawn. The Jimmy-like figure melted, returning to a thick black liquid that smelled of sulfur, seeping down the window frame and disappearing into the cracks in the decayed wood of the porch. Jimmy watched the process intently, noting in his memory that light was the absolute weakness of this anomaly. Jimmy waited until the sun had fully risen above the horizon before he decided to descend downstairs. He walked through the living room of the old house, ignoring the old radio, now dead and covered in a thick layer of dust. The foul smell of sulfur that had hung over the night had evaporated, replaced by the scent of dry earth baked by the morning sun. With calm, measured steps, he walked out of the ranch area, back through the desert toward the main highway. He didn't look back, not out of fear, but because tactically, the threat in that zone was no longer active during the light cycle. After several hours of walking, the black asphalt of the highway appeared before his eyes. Shortly after, a large logistics truck slowed and stopped beside it. Jimmy climbed into the passenger seat, greeted by the cool breeze from the truck's air conditioning, a stark contrast to the desert heat outside. As the truck began to pull away, Jimmy slowly glanced up at the passenger side mirror. He stared at his reflection. He was truly himself again.